And we're going to welcome back Keith Delaplane. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you. Okay, share screen. You need to enable screen sharing, I think.
See, I never turned it off, but go ahead. It turned itself off. I apologize for that.
All right, there we go.
There you go.
Okay, do you have a title screen?
We sure do.
Okay. If I can advance, we're good. Okay, well, thank you all for coming back. I guess the first time you had no choice, but the second time you do. So I'm glad to see you back. I don't know. I think we should take some pleasure in this title to know that there are other things that can go wrong besides varroa mites, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. So, with that, let me get the advance going. Advance. There we go. I love this cartoon, and someone some years ago sent me this anonymously, and I have used it shamelessly ever since. So if you are that beekeeper that sent me this cartoon, thank you. I have used it a lot. Anyway, here we go. We got a knight in shining armor. My queen, I pledge my allegiance. How can I serve the kingdom? Okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to stab our enemies using this tiny sword. I also want you to hook the sword into your internal organs, and that way when you stab someone, it rips out all your guts and you die. Your enemy won't die, of course, but it should sting a little, and maybe they won't bother us afterward. Does this sound like a good plan to you? Well, I love this. This cartoonist obviously knew his or her biology pretty well, because they are capturing the biology of altruism, aren't they? What we see all the time in worker bees, and what we see all the time in worker ants and worker wasps. It is a feature of social life. And it should be, a mystery to all of us. And I do hope that at some point in your beekeeping, you've stopped and just thought about that, because, she's talking here about a worker bee, isn't she? How the worker bee will sacrifice herself if necessary to help her queen, to save her queen. Her altruism is of an extreme type. She is not only sacrificing her life, she is sacrificing her reproduction. So it's the most extreme form of altruism that we can see. And it has been a real puzzlement in students of social evolution ever since Darwin first proposed his great theory. And I'm going to touch briefly, but not in great detail, on how that actually comes about through another big picture idea. And that's this idea that I alluded to earlier this morning, that the pattern of history, of natural history, the recurring pattern, it is a winning formula, because we see it repackaged differently across all levels of evolution. And this winning formula is that lower biological units will clump together into successively higher. And then that one is nested inside yet another level. Let me see if I can get my spotlight working here. I may want to use that. I don't think it's going to happen. Sorry. So anyway, this successive layer of increasing complexity, we start with unlinked nucleotides clumping together to form replicating nucleic acids, who then clump together to form chromosomes. And those chromosomes clump into other structures like the membranes of the cell that package that chromosome. And then those cells get bundled into other cells, and we call them a multicellular organism when they achieve that. And it doesn't stop there. It actually goes one level higher, which is we call the superorganism, when you have individual organisms who then group together and form a larger entity yet, which is, in our case, the honeybee. And it's the honeybee that is sort of the poster child of all of the superorganisms. And it arrives through the same pattern of lower levels clumping together. I'm sorry, I can't get this bar to go away. I do not have a cursor active to activate the cursor to make it go away. So I apologize for that bar right there, but hopefully I can get through it okay. Wait, let's see if I can.
We don't see a bar, not on my end, Keith. We don't see your
Sweet.
cursor either.
Okay, no problem then.
We don't see a bar.
Okay, great. Right, so this pattern is worth really emphasizing, because it goes back to that point that I made earlier this morning, how evolution is equally the story of cooperation. And especially in my part of the country, okay, let's face it, we got lots of problems with evolution in the schools and other places, and this is a problem that needs to be addressed. That cooperation is equally a part of the natural history on this planet. And at each one of these successions that I'm showing you, there is a tacit agreement. And the lower levels are saying, okay, I'm going to join with other lower levels. And it's like all the nucleotides say, okay, let's listen up, everybody. We're all going to join together into a chromosome. But the rule is we all have to cooperate and not be our own selfish interests in order for this chromosome to hang together. And the chromosome does that for the cell, and the cell does that for the organism. There has to be that treaty. There has to be a peace treaty formed where the lower levels will agree to not be in conflict, or else that next step will never get off the ground. So this is fundamental. It's critical. It's important to understand that the history of life is the history of cooperation. And of course, it doesn't always work, does it? And I'll just lay it out there right now. I imagine everybody, literally 100% of all of you that are listening to me and me, we have all been impacted one way or another with cancer. Okay, we know this. We either know somebody, we have a loved one, or we have it ourselves. And cancer is simply an expression of when the lower levels fail to play by the rules. This whole paradigm, this whole structure holds together with all of those lower levels agreeing to the rules of the game. We have structures and pathways in our body that keep those components in a state of cooperation. And when those components begin to degrade, whether through environmental exposure or normal aging, when those constraints begin to fall apart, then the lower entities are able to express themselves selfishly. So a point I'm trying to make here is that even though each of these grades have to come together and cooperate, they are all poised for mutiny. Once the constraints are lowered, there's always a risk of mutiny. Now, of these grades that you're looking at, from unlinked nucleotide all the way up to the multicellular organism, these structures are pretty darn stable. We're relatively long-lived multicellular organisms, right? We count our lifespan by decades. And so for most of us, for several decades, we're able to ward off cancer. So we're a relatively stable entity. The superorganism, because each of its components is its own organism, the superorganism is inherently less stable. The superorganism in evolutionary time is a rather tentative proposition. It's like, hey, let's try this and see. It's, as you can expect, a relative newcomer in the history of life, a recent innovation, if you will. And just like the cells in our body are poised for mutiny, the workers in a honeybee colony are also poised for mutiny. So how do we get around this and make it work? Okay, advance, advance, advance. Yeah. Hey, Stephen, I don't know why, but my slides aren't advancing. I seem to be frozen.
What I would recommend would be unshare your presentation, turn off your video, we'll just have your voice, and then reshare your presentation. Maybe that will clear it up.
Okay, sharing is paused. I'm stopping to share. Okay, so you suggest I try sharing again?
No, oh yeah, sharing again, but just leave your video off.
Oh, let's leave video off. I
Yeah.
can do that?
Well, we can turn it off if you can. Yeah, just go down to the stop video at the bottom. And now share. Let's see if
Stop
you can
share.
roll through.
Holy cow, I just lost bear with me, I'm sorry, my presentation.
Take your time. We're in no rush. I mean, you're in a rush, but we're in no rush. But it's not like we started the day with a little bit of a glitch that I can't explain. So no worries here.
Okay, well, there's my presentation. Okay, I got my presentation back. That's reassuring. So go back here to share screen. And there's that. And I'm sharing. Okay, is it back?
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, it's back.
We see your cursor also.
Well,
Put it
that's
on slideshow.
okay, well, it's good. I just hope it advances now.
Oh, it will.
All right, well, there's that.
Great.
Okay, good.
Okay, it's advancing.
I'm reassured.
Awesome.
Okay, there we have a chromosome, right?
Take a deep breath.
Well, this is not the fundamental, but perhaps the most iconic unit of genetic inheritance for most people. And if you were to grab one end of that chromosome, which occurs in the nucleus of our cells, and if you could unravel it, you would get that most famous molecule of all, the double helix of DNA. And you can see I've kind of pulled a strand of that chromosome there at the very bottom. And these molecules, the chromosomes, are extremely, I mean, that's an understatement of the century, extremely information dense. But look at all those folds. See how that one single long DNA chromosome just folds back on itself. And this is one of the reasons why geneticists often find genes that are linked together, but they are very distant from one another on the actual chromosome. And the reason for that is they do touch by virtue of all of the kinks and bends that occurs in that molecule. And in diploid animals like you and me, we have two sets of each chromosome in our cells. And here we have a complete complement of chromosomes in a honeybee female. They have 16 pairs, which we call 2N, for a total of 32. And traditionally, when we do a karyotype, which is what this is called, a diagram of all the chromosomes of an organism, these numbers are species unique and species specific, and we usually rank them in order of their size. Chromosomes will have numbers and identities based on this ranking by size. And here we have a female honeybee in her nucleus. She has 16 pairs that look something like this, all mashed up inside the nucleus of each cell. Well, as is true of the entire order Hymenoptera, the ants and the wasps and the bees, that does not hold true for the males. The males in their evolutionary history lost fully half of their genomic complement. So they don't have any pairs. They have single chromosomes for a 1N complement of 16. And this is true across the entire order. This is true of ant males, wasp males, and honeybee males. But it raises some really interesting outcomes in the relatedness in the honeybee colony, as we will see here in a minute. I know this is a mess. I'm going to make it easier for you. But we have here all of the relationships inside a honeybee colony. Look up here at generation 1. We have one female mated to one male, and all of the arrows show the possible genes that those individuals hold in common. Well, let's simplify things. First of all, the female just like any female, like a female human being or female mammal, passes on half of her genome with every offspring that she produces. And that's true whether her offspring is a female on the left or a male there in the middle. And I have identified the males and females with little M's and F's there on the corner. So the queen is always producing 50-50 of her genome with every egg she lays. Well, things are different for the workers, though. Look down there on generation 2. Because of because of the fact that a male only comes from his mother, then that means that male does not have a father, which means that a worker is only related to her brother by 25%. And here's where things get really weird. Because of the fact that a drone delivers 100% of his genome in all of his sperm, that means that his daughters are not just normally related, they are super related to one another. So take a look there at generation 2. The 2 females have 75% of their genes in common. And that's an important fact to hang on to. If there is a simple colony with one mother mated to one male, all of her daughters in that colony will not be sisters to one another. They are super sisters to one another. And they are related by 75%, not the normal 50%. Okay, now look at generation 3. Those females in generation 2, they could reproduce if they wanted to, not even have to mate, right? Just like laying workers do today. So they could produce eggs and they could produce males, half of their genome, just like when their mother produced them. But they have only half of their genome in common with their sons. And this raised the remarkable prospect that a worker is more related to her sister than she is to her own son. And when that realization was made, it was thought to be the answer to social evolution. It was like a eureka moment. This is why workers are altruistic. I mean, it was such a beautiful theory, and it came out in the mid-1960s. And I have lived under the shadow of that theory my entire life, kin selection theory. And in kin selection theory puts forward the proposition that the behaviors that we see in colonies can be explained by these hyper-related relationships that occur, all because the hymenopteran male has only half of his chromosomes. So if they stay at home, generation 2, if they stay at home and help their mother produce more super sisters, they win the Darwinian game big time. With every new sister they help their mother produce, they're passing on 75% of their genes, not 50%. So it makes sociality look like a pretty sweet deal. It's like, hey, why strike out and make my own nest when I can stay at home and help mom produce more super sisters? But, and you knew there was a but coming, didn't you? But nature seems to resist neat and tidy little explanations, because all you have to do is do a little thinking and realize that on average, by staying at home, that daughter is not necessarily getting as sweet a deal as it sounds, because she is in fact also helping her mother produce brothers with whom she has only 25% of her genes in common, which you average that all out, you're back to just an ordinary 50%. So it was kind of like a deflating of the bubble, you might say, when people started figuring out that, wait, overall, it's not really the super deal that we thought, perhaps. But it's still not totally a bad deal. I mean, let's think about it. If I stay at home and help mom produce super sisters and brothers, I'm passing on half of my genes. Or I could fly out, mate, and found my own nest and propagate 50% of my genes. What would you do? What would you do in a situation like that? You could see how it's very adaptive to just stay at home. I mean, it's kind of like, why bother? I always point out This is where I could invoke the millennials, right? Who like to stick around and hang out with mom and dad a few extra years. Well, it's not that bad a deal, is it? Do you really blame them? Going out and founding your own nest is risky, it's costly. So why not just stay at home? So this too was a big impetus to sociality, just the ease and benefit of living in the same nest with one another. But there's still some asymmetries going on here, because even if two workers are able to produce sons, they are not going to be very motivated to take care of nephews. You see that? If you have a relatedness to your nephew of only 0.375, don't like that. I don't want to spend my time raising nephews. I want to spend my time raising siblings. And mothers, they don't want to spend time rearing grandchildren. They're only 25% related to them. So what keeps this little society hanging on together? Well, the answer is they police one another. Mothers don't want their daughters reproducing. Daughters don't want their sisters reproducing. So what they all do is eat worker eggs. They don't eat their mother's eggs, but they eat each other's eggs. The mothers will eat daughters' eggs, and daughters will eat sisters' eggs. And by doing this, the little tidy colony manages to hang together. As long as everybody plays by the rules, we can still crank out 50% of our genes if we stick around and help mom. And this was the scenario that kind of held early social colonies together. It was tentative, it was a little bit fragile. It was, again, they're poised for mutiny, but nevertheless, this was a locomotive that was able to run the train for a while. And we see here a series of very earliest steps in social evolution. On the far left, we have the simplest possibility. This is a totally solitary female. She has dug a vertical shaft in the soil, which is, by the way, still the dominant lifestyle across all of the bees. The vast, vast majority of them practice scenario A to this day. And off to the side, she has made a little side gallery with a ball of pollen and deposited an egg on it. Okay, well in B, there in the middle, things are getting a little more interesting. We have a solitary shaft, but we now got roommates. They might be mother and daughter. They might be unrelated of the same generation, just two females, sharing an apartment. And equally important, we have two brood cells. So this is just basically a roomie situation. They're just roomies hanging out together in the same apartment. But in C, things are starting to get more interesting because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 females living in one nest, but we only have 2 brood clumps. And this tells us somebody is not reproducing. We're starting to see a rudimentary division of labor. Incidentally, division of labor does not require evolution to emerge. It can emerge instantly. I mean, like instantly in front of your eyes. You can take 2 solitary bees, 2 solitary females. You can do this spring if you want to, and check my words out. You can take 2 solitary female bees, put them together in a laboratory domicile, and assuming that they accept it and they live, you will instantly see division of labor. There will almost assuredly be one of them that assumes reproductive tasks, hangs out in the nest, and there will be another one who assumes foraging tasks. It just happens. When you throw individuals together, there is instantly an assortment of tasks and specializations that happen. Now, that's not to say that natural selection does not embellish upon that. It does tremendously. Remember this morning, I gave that diagram of the different tasks that bees go through. That is evolved complexity. But the base situation of division of labor is emergent. It is not evolutive. Okay, so under this situation, we still have some tentative tensions going on. Think about it. Everybody's playing by the rules, okay? We got generation 1, we got generation 2, and nobody is producing males. You know, the sisters are agreeing, they're policing each other, so they're not producing any sons. Everything is normal, okay? But there's still a tension, and this is it. Go back to that relatedness amongst those siblings in generation 2. If I were a female in generation 2, I would far rather produce sisters than I would brothers. I mean, just look at it. With every sister I help mom produce, I'm passing on 75% of my genes. Every brother I produce, it's only 25% of my genes. And that means exactly a 3-to-1 ratio of preference for females over males. And this is true. You can push the issue experimentally and show that this happens. Generation 2 females do prefer to rear super sisters over brothers. The mother, on the other hand, doesn't care. With every egg she lays, she's producing or passing on 50% of her genes. So she wants to produce them at a 1-to-1 ratio. Here's the tension. The mother wants to produce equal amounts of daughters and sons. Her daughters want to produce more sisters to an exact ratio of 3-to-1. This is considered a social tension in the nest. It may be one reason why simple nests of just one female mated to one male, they never amount to much. We have a group of bees that very common all over the world. I'm sure you have them in New Mexico, but the sweat bees, they're the family Halictidae. This group, it's a huge family of bees, is very overrepresented with simple eusocial species who never get much further than this stage that I'm showing you here. Their colonies are small. We're talking a few tens of individuals, and they just don't have a lot of complex behaviors like we see in the honeybee nest. And it's probably partly a result of this tension. There's not, total peace in the neighborhood. There is fraction going on. There's probably a lot of effort by the mother in depositing male eggs that her daughters just ignore. So that's wasted energy, wasted effort. Things are not as efficient as they could or should be. And so these little simple societies never get very interesting. Well, again, they can police to make this happen, but there's another way that natural selection has acted to mitigate this problem. What if the mother just starts practicing promiscuity? At the very first stages of multiple mating, it was probably more of a sperm dose issue. Hymenopteran females are very inefficient at mating. They lose the vast majority of their sperm in their mating flights. And incidentally, this is still true to this day. There's really only one species that we know of, Apis florea, in Southeast Asia, where the semen is injected directly into the spermatheca, which is extremely efficient and extremely rare. And I wonder if this may have something to do with the reason why Florea is one of the simplest of the Apis. The rest of them just blast the semen up into the median and lateral oviducts of the female. And then the semen, most of it just drains out as she's flying, and only a very, very small fraction of it ever makes it into the spermatheca. So the earliest efforts toward promiscuity were probably just adaptive for getting more sperm. Maybe they were just losing it all. And if they mated with more than one male, they improved their chances. But in fact, a whole raft load of additional benefits became apparent. In haploid polyandry, as you can imagine, the relationships do get a little more messy. And I'm just going to skip to the second generation. Let's take a look at what things happen there. The blue workers are the daughters of the blue drone. I've simplified it in many ways. In this case, she's only mated to 2 drones. And we know in nature they normally mate with a lot more, but I'm just keeping things simple here. In generation 2, the blue worker is the daughter of the blue drone, and the red workers are the daughters of the red drone. And you see that their relationship has plummeted. They're only 25% of their genes in common with a half sister. Now, you've still got that 75% in common with your super sisters, but there's now relatively fewer of them in the nest because they're diluted with these other males that their mother had mated with. So if you were to do the math across generation 2, the average relatedness amongst all the workers has now dropped to about an average of 30%. Okay, on average, 30%. So the workers have taken a hit. Look at generation 3. Those workers can still commit mutiny and bail out, and they can still produce sons. In fact, they're even more motivated to now, because if they produce a son, they're passing on half of their genes. If they're helping their mom produce more sisters, they're only passing on 30% of their genes. But if they help their sisters produce nephews, it drops down to only 12.5% of their genes in common. They really don't want to do that. So what's the answer? Policing. Again, policing continues on even into these polyandrous colonies, because what the workers kind of do is shrug their shoulders and they say, you know what? I guess 30% is not that bad. You know, we get a nest, we have increasing complexity in our colony, our environmental survival is improving, our population size is getting bigger, and I guess 30% is a reasonable compromise. But what makes it even more melodramatic is it reaches a point where they have no say-so in the matter anymore, due to a process we call in biology great moments in evolution, or the point of no return. I love this I hope you all have seen this before. Gary Larson from the 70s and 80s. This is one of his greatest cartoons. This says it all. Great moments in evolution. Well, we are at a great moment in evolution right now in our story about the honeybee. Once they get to this promiscuous stage where the female, the mother, is mating with many males, and the workers are getting a raw deal. The reason this could happen in the first place is because enough time had elapsed that the mother group and the sister and the daughter groups were getting morphologically diverse and more distinct from one another. There was a lineage in these simple colonies of some of them who were really good at mothering, and others that were really good at foraging and nest work, and they got more and more divergent until finally they were anatomically different from one another. And once you have that, where the workers can no longer reproduce, and you have the females who can no longer do any work, you now, and for the first time, have true castes. We've never had castes up until this point. We just had mothers and daughters. But now we can, for the first time, say we really do have queens and workers. And we call this the point of no return. The mother is free to practice promiscuity, and the workers can't do anything about it because they are committed to living together as a group. And once this happened, then things really took off. And the biology and the radiation and the diversification of life histories in the social complex nests reached proportions that are literally imitated by organisms like you and me. The cognitive ability of a honeybee nest is staggering. The individual workers are staggering themselves, but their ability to forage out over a landscape and to make optimum foraging decisions is unparalleled by any organismal forager. Pure and simple. So their ability to solve evolutionary problems due to the size and complexity and the caste specialization that polyandry provided is comparable to what we see in organisms. The honeybee colony is also homeothermic to a degree comparable to an organism like you and me. They don't hibernate. That's false. That's a wrong word to use when we talk about honeybee colonies over winter, because they stay homeothermic. Now they manage it. They keep each other warm because their cold tolerance shifts as a group as they go through winter. But it's group clustering behavior that makes them carry through, and collectively as a superorganism, they are just as homeothermic as you and me. So the problem-solving capacities that were granted honeybees by practicing polyandry are comparable to organisms like you and me. A very successful life decision. Well, okay, so we have arrived at the superorganism. I have taken you down a path of complex relationships inside the nest. I have talked about policing behavior, which has enforced the inmates in these nests to follow the rules, and it works pretty well. But you also need to know that they're still poised for mutiny. Workers are still willing and able to break the rules and go out and reproduce if they are given the chance. One of the best ways that we see that today, we see the new constraints in the form of queen pheromones. The queens don't have to eat their daughters' eggs anymore. The daughters continue to eat each other's eggs, but the honeybee queens don't eat eggs anymore. They practice restraint on their daughters through queen pheromones. And we all know, as beekeepers, if you remove that constraint, what happens? The workers' ovaries develop and they start laying eggs. And this is what you're seeing right here. This is a dissection of worker ovaries. In fact, it's kind of like the two arms of the Y going out and meeting there in the middle. Those two branches of the letter Y are the ovaries of workers. And they are very simple, they're very underdeveloped, they're very vestigial, but they are still functional. And once that pheromone is removed, they do develop and they produce eggs. Workers have lost the ability to mate. They can't do that anymore. But being members of the Hymenoptera as they are, they can produce unmated eggs which turn into males. And they will do this at the drop of a hat. You take away a queen and within days you have workers' ovaries developing. So they leap upon these opportunities. It's not like they're hesitant. They jump at it. It's like horses held at the gate at the beginning of a race. And the only thing that's keeping them from reproducing is all of these constraints of policing and pheromones. Otherwise, they'd break the rules instantly. And we always know these telltale signs, don't we, of laying workers. Laying workers are just really rotten egg layers. They lack the ability of queens to measure cells and to appraise the environment for their egg. They make mistakes. They lay eggs on top of larvae. They lay eggs on top of other eggs. They lay eggs on the sides of the walls. It's because they've lost these mothering adaptations. Give them another million years, they probably won't even be able to do this. And in fact, we have in ants workers that cannot lay any eggs whatsoever. So yes, they do lose these characters entirely if given enough time. Once a worker, and this seems to be just universal across not only honeybees, but other species as well. Once a sterile worker reverts back to these rudimentary forms of reproduction, they, without exception to my knowledge, abandon any housekeeping work. It's like that area of their brain is shut off. The nursing capacity, the foraging capacities are just shut off once their ovaries are activated, and they don't do any colony work anymore. They revert back to selfish reproducing behavior. They have lost their altruistic inclinations. And this, at the end of the day, is why queenless colonies collapse. It's because all social integrity and colony work has flown out the window. Well, enter the Cape bee of South Africa. This is a unique There is no other bee like it, or honeybee like it, amongst all of the apis. And it is naturally restricted to the extreme Cape region of South Africa. The Cape bee, alone among mellifera, the Cape bee's workers are able to lay fertilized eggs, as in the full complement of chromosomes. Workers begetting workers, if you will. A worker producing a female egg, if you were. And Cape bees can do this. One of the leading hypotheses is why they evolved this character. It's in response to the extreme wind conditions that is experienced in the Cape of South Africa. Being at the terminus of the continent like that, in the conjunction of two oceans, the winds are quite fierce. And so it is thought that Capensis queens on their mating flights are lost at a higher than normal average. And thus it was adaptive for the workers to evolve parthenogenesis so that they can rear female eggs. And they do. And so what the Capensis worker does is, well, a laying worker is a rotten egg layer no matter what, whether you're mellifera or whether you're Capensis. So these Capensis colonies, when they're in their queenless phase, they're pitiful. I mean, they're pathetic. The brood is spotty, the populations tank. But unlike a normal laying worker colony, they don't die. Eventually, they will rear one of these parthenogenic female eggs into a queen. The queen emerges, the queen mates, and the colony comes roaring back to strength again. So the Cape bee can phase in and out of a queenless or queen-right phase indefinitely. So you can see if it's true that high queen mortality in mating, you can see how this would be adaptive. It's an adaptation for kind of compensating for losing your queen, to let the colony come right back. Well, unfortunately, the Cape bee has also been shown to be a social parasite. This was brought about with migratory beekeepers bringing their bees from the north of South Africa into the south of South Africa. And the bees they were migrating, by the way, were Apis mellifera scutellata, and that is the East African honeybee that we know all too well here in southern New Mexico, right? Well, this same bee was used by migratory beekeepers to go south into South Africa, and then the Cape bee was able to parasitize it. Now what happens is drifting Cape bee workers will drift into scutellata colonies, and they will kill the resident queen, and they will take over rearing Cape workers. And so the colony begins a terminable decline. Unlike the pure Capensis stock, most of these colonies eventually die. And so you have this terminal state of queenlessness. You can't go in there and requeen it because the Cape workers kill any queens that you insert in the process. And so this has become a serious problem for commercial beekeeping in South Africa. And let us pray really hard that we don't ever get Capensis in this country, because it is very, very difficult to control this social parasite, because it's driven by the workers. You know, so you as a beekeeper open up the nest, oh no, laying workers. Well, which ones are the Cape bees? You know, you really can't control it. So this is a serious problem. But in its natural, uninterrupted state, it's stable. The Cape bees just phase in and out, phase in and out, phase in and out, and they manage to sustain themselves and even be productive for beekeeping. But when they become parasites, it's a whole different story, and the host colony ultimately dies. I'll just kind of show you some of the dynamics here. This is some of the relationships in a Cape colony. And just take a look at what this means. You got the queen, generation 1, and she's passing on half of her genes. Let's take a look at the blue worker there. And the blue worker, you know, gets half of her mother's genes, but that blue worker is a parthenogenic Cape bee. So she can produce a clone daughter, which by definition, she has 100% of her genes in common with her clone. So it's a no-brainer what that cape worker is going to want to do. She's going to want to produce clone workers. And the only reason that that does not ultimately carry the day is because these large colonies, they need the genetic variation of a polyandrous mother, and it's that adaptation that keeps this from just taking off. What we're seeing here, I think, is a clue to what the future holds in store. You remember in my opening slide, I was showing the different evolutionary stages, and we've culminated in the superorganism. And so I've had people say, well, what's next? You know, is it going to be like the uber organism, or is it going to be the super ecosystem, or the Gaia effect of the whole planet? You know, well, unfortunately, no. Our experiences with the Cape bee indicate that the next natural succession of evolutionary steps is social dissolution. I know that's a little bit of a pessimistic view, but that's just what the evidence is showing right now. We have no evidence in the animal kingdom that we've discovered yet. You know, we're still making discoveries, so who knows what we may find that uber organism. But for the time being, it seems that the superorganism is as far as we can go. And what begins to happen after that is social parasitism, which is not a good thing. Okay, things that can go wrong besides mites. Well, here's a question for you. As a beekeeper, when you go out to your hives and you find a rotten queen, she's just not good, what do? You get on the phone or you get on the internet and you click on a good Georgia queen producer, and they send you a good Georgia queen that arrives the next day or two, right? Well, you stick that Georgia queen inside your colony, you've killed that old rotten queen, gotten rid of her, you stuck in that good Georgia queen, and what happens? They accept her. Have you ever wondered about that? Why should they do this? Think about it. This is a complete alien. She has no genetic kinship to the residents whatsoever, but you import this alien exotic queen and they accept her. Well, this gets us to an interesting thing about the superorganism. Once you get past that point of no return, nepotism has no longer been adaptive. It is not good for the colony for there to be nepotistic infighting. There has been many constraints to, in fact, keep that from happening. And nepotism has just been downgraded. And this is a good thing if you're a beekeeper and you have queenless colonies. You can give them brood and they don't kill that alien brood. You can give them a queen and they don't kill that alien queen. Because in a normal functioning superorganism, nepotism is generally not a good thing. Well, that's fine and good. Except when it comes to queen rearing time, what happens? We know the colony raises a bunch of queens. It's an insurance policy, right? Let's just raise a bunch of them and hope that some of them survive. But eventually what happens is one of them emerges, and then the one who emerges goes down the row and kills all of her rivals. Well, this is an example of selfishness coming back in spades. And the queen is probably the most selfish individual in the nest because she, and she alone, is the mother of every bee in that colony. Now, the workers, you know, they have to cooperate with one another because they're just workers, right? Their genetic fate depends on collaboration and cooperation. But a queen is she has the jackpot. She has the prize. She passes on 50% of every egg that she lays. So the queen brooks no favors. She brooks no favorites. She does not practice nepotism. To the contrary, she practices fratricide. She will go down the row and kill all of her sisters. No, only I get to be the queen. Now this does not happen cost-free. We know, for example, in the ants and the termites, they do not practice fratricide, the queens, and it is perhaps no surprise then that it's in the ants and the termites that we have the absolute pinnacle of social evolution. We have ant colonies that number in the millions upon millions. We have ant colonies, the size measured in acres. We have orders of magnitude more castes than the honeybees do. They are the winners when it comes to terrestrial global dominance. Ants, if you were to take all the ants on planet Earth and put them in one balance, and then put all of the other organisms in the world, including the elephants and the megafauna and all the whales and all the humans in the other side of the balance, ants, everybody else, there's more biomass of ants on Earth than all other terrestrial organisms combined. So yes, uber complex sociality has been a winning formula, and they get there by practicing more extreme nepotism. They do tolerate their sisters and let them become queens as well, and it's rewarded at the colony level. So I leave this thought with you that evolution is not perfection. It's not like there's some preordained perfection point that evolution is moving toward. Evolution just simply works. What works is what evolves, and if it works, it sticks and it stays. And for the honeybee, who occupies sort of an intermediate grade in sociality, we see the cost of a queen practicing fratricide. Now, as beekeepers, you can do something about this. What if you just sort of do an end run about queen's selfishness and you trick them into tolerating another queen in the colony? And we call this the double queen manipulation. You can basically take a strong colony coming out of winter, as you see there on the left, and you put the old queen and most of the brood in the bottom chamber, and you put a new queen and the rest of the brood in the topmost brood chamber, and you separate them with a double screen so that they can't get at each other and kill each other. And that top unit is in an independent colony. It has its own flight entrance, and you let both queens carry the day for a while. They're both producing brood, and when they're both about equal strength, take away the double screen. You can save one of the queens if you want to at this point, because one of them is going to kill the other. So you might as well salvage one of them and use it elsewhere. But what you have done is done an end run and tricked that colony into tolerating two queens, and you get to see the benefits of not practicing fratricide. And you can get ginormous honey crops off these double screen colonies. I used to do this when I was a kid, growing up in Indiana, and I stopped doing it because it was too much work. I had colonies that were taller than I was, and I had to get a step ladder and take off the supers. And I thought, this isn't fun. And we're talking about a kid, a teenager. So imagine what it'd be like if you were a little senior to that. So anyway, give it a try. It's interesting from a beekeeping point of view, but it also gives you a glimpse into what evolution could have produced in the honeybee. Okay, I want to talk about something that is really fascinating. It's the idea of rare royal families in the honeybee. And this was published by Robin Moritz, who's a preeminent honeybee geneticist, recently retired, unfortunately, from Germany. But I just got to tell you this piece of research that he did. It has to do with subfamilies that are carried by particular males. This is a trait that is transmitted by subfamily. And these subfamilies are overrepresented as queens. Think about this. If I am a normal queen, I have a little bit of control over who my successor is in a normal seasonal sequence. And queens do this by depositing eggs in queen cups. And queen cups are statistically a little more biased toward being reared into queens. So I have a little bit of control by laying eggs in queen cups. Well, what if it's a supersedure situation? Let's say the queen dies or is mashed by the beekeeper. Well, the queen no longer, obviously, has any control over her successor at this point, especially if it's in the off season when there's no egg deposition in the queen cups. Who does have the shots is now the workers. The workers get to choose who the next queen is in a supersedure situation. And this is where the rare royal patrolines do their thing. these royal larvae have the ability to dupe the nurse bees into feeding them royal jelly. It's like they're saying, hey, you up there, feed me royal jelly. Okay, I get the royal jelly, not him, give me the royal jelly. And it works. The nurses will feed these royal female larvae royal jelly, and they are disproportionately turned into queens. That's interesting enough. But the flip side of it is even stranger. These rare royal patrolines are completely absent from the workers. There are no workers from these patrolines. It's only queens. It's as if they are saying, make me into a queen or nothing at all. And these royal workers just simply don't exist. They're ignored. They're not fed. They're not fed anything. They just die. So this is a subfamily that evolved to only become a queen. And these are real, honest to goodness, this isn't fiction. These are real European honeybee patrolines that are out there. You probably got them in your apiary. I probably got them in mine. And this raises a fascinating scenario of an old beekeeping truism that all things equal, supersedure queens are pretty bad. The traditional explanation is, well, you know, a supersedure can happen any time of the year. It doesn't have to be springtime. So it might be that the supersedure queens are just not fed as well. And so they don't develop as well, and they don't become as good of a queen. And that's possible. You know, this hypothesis does not exclude that possibility. But it seems more plausible now, thanks to Robin Moritz, that supersedure queens are in fact royals. And we now know that anytime we see this anti-nepotism rearing its ugly head, when we see anti-altruism rearing its ugly head, that is code for social parasite. And every time we see these individuals that go back and insist on reproducing, they cut off any of the worker-related tasks. And that adds to the premise of why workers in these lines don't survive, is because these lines are really good at making queens and they're really rotten at making workers. And if they reproduce, they produce workers that are rotten workers. So it seems just a fact of nature. I'm either going to be reproductive and altruistic, or I'm going to be reproductive and just not do any work for the colony whatsoever. And the parasites, just like the Cape bees and like the royal patrolines, are really bad at doing colony work. So this is an alternate explanation of why supersedure queens may be rotten. You know, from a beekeeping point of view, she's a no good supersedure, the colony tanked on her. Well, this is an alternate explanation. If they're parasitic, they're not going to be very good at doing altruistic tasks for the colony. Okay, so let's kind of wrap up. The honeybees are a fountain of new discoveries. They're also a window into us. And I talked this morning how the honeybee, in my opinion, it seems inconceivable to me that our ancient Homo ancestors did not prey upon them. And knowing as we do that a honeybee colony has calories measured in the tens of thousands, these were caloric jackpots to evolving Homo sapiens. And in my opinion, I think it's very plausible that that nutrient boost went toward improving our brains, you know, the dietary requirements of the evolving Homo sapiens brain. It's simply that. It's just an hypothesis. It's an idea. Nobody's tested it. But they give us more than that, just where we came from. They also show us how our bodies evolve, and this recurring pattern across all the tree of life. Okay, this is general, it's not specific. It's a general rule of life evolution that lower levels clump together into higher, 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 higher levels, each stage requiring cooperation. But each stage is also always poised for mutiny. So evolution is a tentative thing. The different structures along that stage, or some are more robust than others. The organism's pretty robust. The superorganism's kind of on shaky grounds. What's next for the superorganism probably is social dissolution and social parasitism. And we may kind of see that happening with the Kate bee in real natural time. Queens and workers disagree on sex ratio. This is a big driver for polyandry, for queens being promiscuous. Promiscuity also created fantastic colonies full of genetic diversity, which is what I talked about this morning. Queens don't tolerate revivals to the cost of the colony. They should tolerate rivals, and the colony would be bigger and badder and more fantastic than it is. So evolution is not perfect. It's just optimal. And lastly, supersedure queens may in fact be parasitic. This, in my opinion, gives you a strong warrant as a beekeeper for mashing her and replacing her with another good Georgia queen, just as long as she's a different line, and get that parasitic supersedure line out of there. Right, okay, so I think I'm done with my formal presentations. Maybe there is time for questions. I seem to be spot on my time, so.
Yeah, you did very, very well, Keith. See if you can turn back on your video and we'll start with some questions. I just wanted to start by saying I didn't know that your talk was going to include so much on evolution, but I love the idea that you took us from way in the past to the current, as well as thinking about going forward. And so, I don't know, you talk about social dissolution, and I was thinking about humans and what we're experiencing. We seem to be experiencing some of that in our own generation.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so we have a number of questions. We need to give an award to Matt Ford because he gives the longest question. So we're going to start with that one. He says, Keith, related to the slide showing A, B, C advancing from single solitary female to multiple females, and considering your statement that you can see automatic division of labor even in solitary bees today, he says that makes sense to him. But what is the science behind what would trigger overwintering, continued division of labor, and taking on the huge energy costs of maintaining the life of non-reproductive individuals through the winter?
Overwintering is in part an emergent principle, not an evolved principle. Okay, and this is I guess a point to make. We tend to lay everything at the feet of evolution in the life sciences, when in fact that's not true. There are some organized principles that happen spontaneously, and division of labor is one of them, as I alluded to earlier. Other things happen that are emergent, and that is thermoregulation. We humans are really bad at taking the simplest explanation for complex phenomena. We tend to make it harder than it actually is. And there's no better example of that than overwintering, thermoregulation. You may remember some old stories about the bees in the middle are able to heat up their sisters on the edge, because the sisters on the edge communicate to their sisters in the middle, hey, it's cold out here, please shiver and generate some heat. And they communicate that somehow, and they raise the temperature, and no. All of that is false. What instead happens is they simply cluster together. Pure and simple. They cluster together, and those that are cold ease in a little further into the cluster. Those that are hot, and getting overheated is equally a risk. Those that are hot move out to the edge, and the entire group collectively becomes more cold tolerant as the bees age naturally over winter. So the whole cluster makes it through those two interacting phenomena. So I guess ultimately that's the grand scheme of how overwintering happens. It is a natural outcome of these other factors leading to large groups. And it's very likely that all of this happened in the tropics, and that moving into the temperate zones happened hand in hand with the complexification of these societies and their large populations so that they could do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mark Summer has a question. Because workers have control over cell size, how does that factor into workers controlling relative relatedness to each other?
Well, the cell is in part what we call it's a German word. It's called, but it's a lovely German word. So let's learn it all together here. It's called Bauplan, B-A-U-P-L-A-N, Bauplan. And Bauplan is another thing that happens in evolution, and that is sort of a winning formula that just gets carried along, through evolution simply because it works. And the Bauplan in the case of the cell of the honeybee goes all the way back to the tunnel in the soil. And the tunnel in the soil is the size that it is because the bee is the size it is. So this is in a way, it's another one of those emergent principles that the diameter of the cell is not so much an evolved artifact, it is a received artifact. The simple act, think about it, the simple act of a bee digging in soil creates a tunnel that is the diameter of the bee that's doing the digging. So that is a Bauplan constraint that has simply just been carried on through evolution because it works. And the honeybee, we have in the subterranean nests, we have glandular depositions that are deposited to keep nematodes and other predators from getting in. Well, it was a homology to take that structure and turn it into wax comb. Why change the diameter when it already works? It was an inherited Bauplan. So, I love it, but it's this curious interface between emergent principles and evolved innovations.
Excellent. A question from Benjamin Scott. Do the drones of laying workers produce viable sperm?
Yes, an enthusiastic yes. However, getting back to the previous question, a good drone is the product of his mother, who was a queen, who does have those maternal specializations and the ability to measure cells and determine cell size before she lays the egg in it. So she will have measured that cell, determined that it was a drone cell, and she would have deposited a drone egg in it. So that drone will be large, robust, and a good, strong flyer, whereas the worker-produced drone did not necessarily benefit from that and could very likely have been reared in a worker-sized cell, so that that drone will be anatomically handicapped. He won't be able to fly as robustly as the normal drones. So they tend to environmentally kind of fall off the cliff, but genetically they're perfectly fine.
Okay, great. Amy Owen has a question. If it doesn't benefit the species, why did the queen evolve, if that's how it happened, to kill rivals?
Yeah, because it works for her.
Yeah, you said she was selfish, right?
She was selfish, and it is just simply what works. And it doesn't have to be bigger and better if it works. And at this juncture in our natural history, Apis mellifera has worked with this combination. Now we can look at it, and maybe there's something that we're missing. That it's better this way than not. Again, that's our short-sighted human vista, right? Well, maybe it is optimal. Maybe this is perfection. That she's practicing selfishness. But looking at the ants and termites, it doesn't seem like it. So I don't know. That's a good question. There's all sorts of junctures in the road, isn't there, over a lineage of evolution, each one of which gets kind of inherited and then passed down forever. So that's the job of phylogenists, and they do a pretty good job of it, by the way. That's been one of the fruits of the genomic revolution, is elevating this to levels of resolution that were not imaginable a generation ago.
Very cool. I retired from Los Alamos Laboratory, where a lot of genetic sequencing was developed many years ago.
It is literally changing biology into a hard science. just like physics and chemistry. It's a mathematical science. I can't imagine what our successors are going to be doing. It's mind-boggling.
Christina Williams has a question. Are supersedure queens similar to emergency queens in terms of royal lines? And then this word that she used, parasitism.
Proto-parasitism, you're probably thinking.
Yeah.
I think anytime, here's the principle. Who is choosing the next queen? And as long as a queen is choosing her successor, then we have no reason to think that it is biased toward any parasitism. But if the workers are choosing it, then the possibility is there that the workers are responding to parasitic larvae that are raising their hands and saying, feed me. So whether it's a supersedure or whether it's an emergency, the point is who's calling the shots? Who is choosing the larvae to feed into a royal jelly and turn into a queen? And anytime that's the case, I think you're in danger of parasitism.
Okay, so that kind of feeds into a question that I had, and I want to make sure I heard you correctly. But how do you know that the larva is like reaching out and saying, feed me, and that the larva is defining which larva get royal jelly?
That's excellent. And they've done, Moritz has done really elegant experiments to exclude the possibility that it was the workers that were choosing their super sister. That has been another old hypothesis ever since 1964 when kin selection was published. The first thought out of people's heads was, oh, I'm going to raise the next queen from my super sister. And we can imagine all this infighting. No, my super sister, my, and again, nepotism, got rid of all of that. So it's not impossible that a queen laying eggs in a cup might accidentally pass along a parasite in one of those cups, but it's much more likely that she's not. And the cup itself is a stimulus for the workers to rear it into a queen. So that's why the queen has a measure of control. It's just a partial measure, but it is a measure. Whereas none of that constraint exists when the workers are making the choice.
Okay, great. Amy has another question. So the rare royal petrolines are genetically different and die if there's no supersedure taking place?
They are driven by drones, which means they probably are in the genomes of some queens because queens have to produce those drones. So ultimately, the parasitic alleles are carried by females, but they parse out to the level of drone, and then that drone makes an entire patroline. But remember too that these parasitic workers, females, are very, very rare. It's just the queens. So somebody is propagating that parasitic line. It's another good reason to get rid of the supersedures.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. How have pesticides impacted recent evolution of honeybees, if at all?
Hi. I am fascinated with the question of whether we could select honeybees for insecticide resistance. We do know that that happens a lot obviously in agricultural pests. It is in general very, very hard to be truthful. I don't know of a single example in the literature of a social insect becoming insecticide resistant. The reason is the unit of selection, which is the queen, is usually buffered from the effects of insecticide, and so selection never gets the opportunity to act on a social insect nest. So I imagine that there is some low grade of selection happening. I mean, we know that you don't have to kill a colony to have it poisoned with insecticide. There's probably some evolution going on in detoxification. But insecticides are so relatively recent in their natural history, that there's not been a lot of time for that to happen. And to my knowledge, no research whatsoever. We just, remember this morning when I talked about this paper that we're working on now on brood mixing as a proxy? One of the things we looked at was neonic resistance. And so, to my knowledge, this will be the first paper to even ask the question. And again, we have not even looked at the data. That's how backed up we are. The data are in the bag, they're in Excel sheets in our computers, but we've not analyzed them yet. So about a year from now, I hope to get that published.
Okay, great. Well, I think similar to our other presenters, you need to hire some more postdocs.
Amen. We're working on it.
Well, listen, I just want to, on behalf of 130 people that are still watching and listening,
All right.
thank you so much. You kept us enthralled. You taught us quite a few things about evolution, and we look forward to hearing about the results of your additional research. We're very proud to have you here today, and we're very grateful. So
I just hope we can do it someday face to face.
absolutely, you're on our list for sure.
Good. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you very much.
All righty. Bye-bye.